Imagine this. You wake up one morning and feel the faint vibration of your phone before your eyes even open. Notifications, hundreds of them, each one tugging at a small thread of your attention. The world is already waiting for you. Opinions, expectations, judgments, invisible eyes watching. You scroll, almost unconsciously. Someone you know is thriving. Another person is outraged. The world seems to be spinning faster than you can think, and beneath it all, an unease grows. You don't call it fear. You call it stress, pressure, overthinking. But if you strip away the language of modern self-help, it's something older, something primal, the quiet fear of not being enough, of being forgotten, of failing to matter in a world that moves without you. Now imagine for a moment that fear didn't exist. Not because you've conquered it, not because you've numbed yourself, but because you've transcended the very conditions that create it. Imagine a life where you could stand before the abyss, your failures, your pain, your mortality, and smile. That was Nietzsche's vision. Most people think of Nietzsche as the philosopher of chaos, the madman who declared, "God is dead." But beneath his volcanic words was not nihilism, it was liberation. He wasn't telling you to despair, he was telling you to wake up, to stand without the crutches of society, religion, or external validation, to stop living like a shadow cast by the expectations of others. He wanted to show you how to live without fear, not by escaping the world, but by embracing its terrifying freedom. Yet here's the paradox. You were raised to believe that freedom is safety, that success is security, that knowledge brings peace. But Nietzsche knew that these were the very illusions that chained the human spirit. He believed that true freedom begins where comfort ends, that courage is born not from confidence, but from confrontation with pain, chaos, and the absurdity of existence itself. So, the question isn't how do you become fearless? The question is, what if fear itself is the proof that you're not truly alive? Because fear isn't just an emotion, it's the invisible architecture of modern life. Every social mask, every polite silence, every anxious scroll through your feed is a monument to fear. Fear of judgment, fear of rejection, fear of being insignificant. We live in an age where courage has been replaced by performance, and rebellion by branding. You may not kneel before gods anymore, but you kneel before something far more deceptive, the opinions of others. Every time you silence your voice to fit in, every time you shrink from discomfort, you build a small cage within yourself. You decorate it with goals, achievements, and distractions. You call it happiness, but deep down, you feel it. The bars are closing in. Nietzsche saw this long before smartphones, social media, or algorithms existed. He saw a species terrified of its own potential. Humans, he said, would rather remain slaves to certainty than face the terror of creating meaning in a meaningless universe. And so, we hide. We seek shelter in ideologies, identities, and systems of thought that tell us who we are. We cling to morality like a warm blanket, believing it keeps the chaos away. But Nietzsche whispered something dangerous, that your morality might just be fear in disguise. Fear of what happens when you think for yourself. Fear of the power that self-creation demands. He once wrote, "The secret of realizing the greatest fruitfulness and the greatest enjoyment of existence is to live dangerously." But what does that mean? Does it mean recklessness? Self-destruction? No, it means the courage to live without guarantees, to confront the uncertainty of existence, and still choose to dance. Imagine walking through life, as if every belief you hold could collapse tomorrow. Every identity could dissolve. Every external source of validation could disappear. Would you still know who you are? This is the frontier Nietzsche stood upon, the place where the self either disintegrates or becomes divine. To live without fear is not to eliminate danger, it is to become larger than it. But modern life does not prepare you for this. It prepares you to obey, to conform, to seek comfort, not courage. It teaches you that fear is an enemy to be avoided rather than a teacher to be understood. Every institution from school to workplace to religion rewards obedience over authenticity. You were taught how to succeed in society, but not how to survive your own mind. And so, fear thrives. It hides beneath ambition, beneath politeness, beneath the constant need to prove yourself. We fear silence because it reveals how hollow we've become. We fear death because we've never truly lived. Nietzsche's secret wasn't to suppress fear, it was to walk straight into it until it burns away everything false. He believed that fear is not an obstacle but a threshold, that to live without fear, you must die before you die, letting go of every borrowed certainty, until all that remains is raw, unfiltered being. But this is not a comfortable path. It's the opposite of everything the modern world tells you to do. It means dismantling the fragile identity you've built to survive. It means realizing that most of what you call you is just a collage of other people's expectations. And when that facade begins to crumble, fear erupts. Existential fear, the kind that shakes the ground beneath your being. Nietzsche knew that this fear is sacred. It's the initiation every true individual must face, because only those who confront fear can be reborn. So, imagine this again, standing at the edge of your own limitations, the wind of uncertainty roaring in your ears, the voices of society calling you back to safety, and a small, wild whisper within you saying, "Jump anyway." That whisper is Nietzsche's legacy, the defiance of the spirit, the call to rise beyond comfort and illusion, to live without guarantees, without gods, without masks. But before you can understand how to live without fear, you must first uncover why fear rules you, where it hides, how it has been woven into the structure of your thoughts, your values, your very identity. And that is where the true descent begins. Because to live without fear, you must first look directly at what makes you afraid to live. You've felt it, haven't you? That quiet sense of being watched not by others, but by yourself. A constant self-surveillance that measures your every word, every decision, every hesitation. You wake up already performing, already curating an identity that others might approve of. You speak, but your words are filtered through invisible rules. You smile, but the smile carries calculation. Somewhere deep within, a question gnaws at you. Who am I when no one is looking? This is where the hidden problem begins. We were born into a world that replaced survival with validation. The ancient human trembled before predators. The modern human trembles before opinions. Fear, once a signal of physical danger, has become psychological, abstract, social. We fear disapproval more than death. We would rather betray our truth than be exiled from the tribe. And in that trade safety for authenticity, we built the greatest psychological prison in history. Carl Jung once wrote that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Why terrifying? Because to accept yourself is to confront the parts you've denied, the shadow, the impulses, the contradictions, the rage, the longing, the envy, the lust, the despair, the things you were told not to feel, the things you buried to survive. From childhood, you were trained to fracture, to split the acceptable from the forbidden, the light from the dark. You learned that certain emotions were bad, certain desires wrong, certain dreams impossible. So, you exiled those pieces of yourself into the unconscious. You smiled when you wanted to scream. You obeyed when you wanted to rebel. You learned to appear good. But every time you repressed a truth, fear grew stronger. Fear of being discovered. Fear of being honest. Fear of being yourself. Nietzsche saw this fragmentation as the root of human suffering. He called it slave morality, a morality built not from strength or authenticity, but from fear and submission. He saw that most people do not choose their values, they inherit them. They live by rules designed to keep them docile, obedient, harmless. The weak, he wrote, invented morality to protect themselves from the strong. But Nietzsche didn't mean physical strength. He meant spiritual strength, the strength to create one's own values, to live by one's own truth, even if it defied the collective. Society, he said, is terrified of such individuals, because the one who lives without fear cannot be controlled. Arthur Schopenhauer, Nietzsche's reluctant predecessor, called this state of repression the will to life, an endless striving that traps humans in desire and dissatisfaction. We seek pleasure, status, recognition, thinking these will silence our anxiety, but the will never rests. It devours. It keeps us running, terrified of the silence that might reveal the futility beneath it all. And this is where the two philosophers meet. Schopenhauer saw the futility, Nietzsche saw the opportunity. Where Schopenhauer advised resignation, Nietzsche demanded transformation. If life is inherently tragic, Nietzsche said, then the only noble response is to love the tragedy, to say yes to the suffering instead of fleeing from it. But how can one love suffering when every instinct screams to avoid it? The answer lies in the psyche itself. Fear thrives in the dark. What is repressed gains power precisely because it is unseen. The shadow, Jung taught, grows monstrous not because it is evil, but because it is ignored. When you refuse to face your darkness, it governs you from the depths. You become haunted by projections, seeing your denied traits in others, blaming the world for the turmoil you refuse to claim as your own. That's why Nietzsche's call, to become who you are, is not an invitation to self-expression, it's a summons to integration, to drag the exiled parts of the soul back into light. But integration is terrifying. It requires you to admit that the enemy you fear most might be living inside your chest, and this is why fear persists. Because we would rather cling to the illusion of goodness than confront the truth of our complexity. We want to believe we are moral, righteous, pure, but in doing so, we deny the vitality that comes from embracing contradiction. Nietzsche understood that fear is the shadow of suppressed will. Every should that rules your life, every moral or social rule you obey blindly creates an inner war between your true nature and your conditioned self. You live in tension between the person you are and the person you pretend to be. That tension becomes anxiety, and anxiety, multiplied by 1 billion individuals, becomes culture. Look at the modern world through this lens. A civilization of anxious selves, projecting their shadows into politics, ideology, and entertainment. People scream about injustice, while refusing to see the injustice within themselves. They condemn others to escape their own reflection. Social outrage becomes a mirror, a way to avoid personal introspection. Fear, then, is not just personal. It is systemic. It is the foundation of collective control. Aldous Huxley saw this clearly in Brave New World. He didn't imagine a dictatorship built on pain, but one built on pleasure and distraction. People would not need to be forced into submission. They would choose it, willingly. They would exchange freedom for comfort, meaning for stimulation, individuality for belonging, and beneath that comfortable numbness would lurk the same primal fear, the fear of awakening. Because to awaken means to lose everything false. It means to die to the person society taught you to be. Nietzsche called this the death of God, but what he really meant was the death of external authority. When there is no longer a God, or a system, or an ideology to define your worth, you stand naked before the abyss. That moment, terrifying, empty, infinite, is where true freedom begins. Viktor Frankl, decades later, would echo this in the concentration camps. He found that meaning does not come from safety, but from responsibility, the choice to confront suffering and still say yes to life. Nietzsche said the same. He who has a why to live can bear almost any how, but finding that why requires shedding the illusions that protect you from fear. It requires dismantling the ego's fortress brick by brick, until you realize the walls were built from borrowed beliefs. You are not afraid of the world. You are afraid of meeting yourself without disguise. The great philosophical tragedy is that the modern individual mistakes comfort for peace. We anesthetize the psyche with pleasure, technology, and constant noise. We confuse distraction for purpose, yet beneath it all, the unconscious hums with terror, because the deeper self knows that this is not living. It's surviving. To live without fear, Nietzsche would say, you must burn the masks. The moral mask, the social mask, the intellectual mask. You must look at the naked truth of who you are and not flinch, but that process demands something modern culture avoids at all costs. Suffering with awareness. Pain, in Nietzsche's philosophy, is not punishment, it's purification. It strips away the inessential. It destroys illusion. It forges the spirit into something unbreakable. Fear, then, is not your enemy. It's your invitation, the gateway to transformation. And yet, every instinct in you resists that call. Because the moment you face fear, you risk losing everything that once gave you comfort, approval, belonging, identity. But perhaps that's the point. Perhaps to live without fear is not to gain more, but to lose everything false, until only truth remains. That truth is waiting in the next descent, the realm of consequences. Because if you refuse to confront fear, it does not disappear. It evolves. It shapes the world around you in ways you cannot see, and that's where we go next. Imagine a city built on fear. No dictator enforces obedience, no police patrol its streets, yet everyone walks in line. Smiles are rehearsed, opinions are softened, and truth has been quietly exiled. People speak of freedom constantly, but their eyes betray something else, an unspoken submission. Not to a ruler, but to the collective gaze. Now realize, that city is not fiction. You live in it. Fear, once personal, has become the invisible architecture of civilization. It governs how you love, how you think, how you present yourself. You feel it when you hesitate before speaking your mind, when you dilute your truth to fit the mood of the room, when you chase approval as if your life depends on it. And maybe, in a way, it does, because fear has become the social currency of survival. You're rewarded for compliance, punished for authenticity. You're praised for restraint, not courage, for fitting in, not standing out. The system doesn't need to threaten you, it just needs to convince you that safety lies in sameness. Nietzsche foresaw this. He predicted a world of what he called the last men, humans who had sacrificed greatness for comfort. They avoided danger, avoided passion, avoided pain. They wanted only ease and entertainment, equality and peace. And yet, beneath their placid smiles, something vital had died. They no longer feared death because they had already stopped living. This is the paradox of modern life. Fear has not disappeared, it has evolved into subtlety. We no longer fear lions or storms. We fear insignificance, cancellation, invisibility. We fear being misunderstood, not because it endangers our bodies, but because it threatens the fragile illusion of who we think we are. And so, we edit ourselves constantly. We filter reality until only the acceptable remains. Our social media feeds have become modern cathedrals, altars to the false gods of perfection and approval. We curate our digital selves as if our salvation depended on them. Every photo, every opinion, every gesture becomes a sermon to convince others and ourselves that we are worthy. But worth built on fear is worth that can vanish with a single silence. The human psyche, Nietzsche knew, cannot endure such constant performance. When you live to be seen, you lose the capacity to see. Your perception becomes warped. You start mistaking the applause for meaning, the crowd for companionship, the mask for identity. You forget that you were born wild, unrepeatable, alive. The consequences are everywhere. Anxiety epidemics, depression disguised as productivity, people medicated not just to dull pain, but to suppress awareness, whole generations mistaking numbness for peace. Gabor Mate, the modern physician-philosopher, calls this the pathology of normalcy. In a world sick with disconnection, the truly healthy appear abnormal. He says addiction, whether to substances, work, or validation, is not the problem itself, but a desperate attempt to fill an inner void created by fear and emotional repression. Nietzsche would have agreed. He saw the addiction to comfort as the ultimate sedative of the spirit. To him, the most dangerous drug was not alcohol or opium, it was conformity. Because conformity doesn't just steal your freedom, it steals your capacity for greatness. And what is greatness, really? Not fame, not power, but the courage to live authentically, to create values rather than inherit them, to stand alone when necessary. Yet fear erodes this courage at the root. It whispers, don't stand out, don't question, don't change. It convinces you that safety is the highest good, even if it means spiritual death. But here's the cruel irony. The more you seek safety, the more fragile you become. Fear breeds avoidance, and avoidance breeds dependence. The more you protect yourself from uncertainty, the less capable you are of facing it. The psyche becomes brittle. Small slights feel catastrophic, minor failures feel fatal. Life becomes an obstacle course of imagined dangers. And this fragility doesn't remain individual, it becomes cultural. Entire societies begin to organize themselves around the avoidance of fear. Risk is pathologized. Discomfort is demonized. We build systems designed to shield us from failure, unpredictability, and emotional pain. But in doing so, we shield ourselves from growth. Nietzsche would call this the triumph of decadence, the decline of the vital spirit. Civilizations, he warned, do not fall because of external enemies. They rot from within, when the will to power our instinct for creation, exploration, and transcendence is replaced by the will to comfort. Look around, and you can see it. Endless distraction, endless consumption, endless anxiety. A world screaming about progress, while quietly suffocating under its own fear of depth. We glorify intelligence but neglect wisdom. We chase self-improvement but fear self-confrontation. We preach empathy while hiding from intimacy. This is not a coincidence, it's a design. Fear is profitable. A fearful population consumes more, obeys more, scrolls more. Fear fuels economies, politics, religions, even relationships. It keeps the machine turning, and the machine rewards the compliant, not the courageous. But what happens when a human being internalizes this dynamic? When they begin to police their own thoughts as if an invisible overseer lives in their mind, they become what Jung called a divided self. The conscious ego plays the role of the guard. The unconscious becomes the prisoner. The person appears functional, but inside, chaos brews. The unacknowledged fears, desires, and truths begin to leak through symptoms: panic, fatigue, resentment, existential dread. And when these symptoms arise, society offers more anesthesia, pills for the anxiety, entertainment for the boredom, spirituality packaged as self-help, everything except what's truly needed: the courage to face the root. But facing the root means confronting the most terrifying question of all. What if my fear is not caused by the world but by my refusal to live as I truly am? That question is dynamite to the ego. It shatters the comforting illusion that fear is an external problem. It reveals fear as a symptom of inner dishonesty, a disconnection between being and becoming. Nietzsche once wrote, "One must still have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star." Yet we've built a culture that pathologizes chaos. We medicate it, moralize it, suppress it. But chaos is not the enemy, it's the crucible of transformation. Without it, no new self can emerge. That's why fear persists in the modern soul. It is the repressed voice of transformation calling from beneath the noise. It is life itself knocking on the walls of the self-made cage, demanding to be let in. And here lies the greatest tragedy. We mistake that knocking for danger. We run from the very force that would set us free. Fear then becomes not just a private emotion, but a cosmic misunderstanding, a refusal to recognize that life's uncertainty is not a threat, but a teacher. Every loss, every humiliation, every failure is an initiation into deeper strength. But without the courage to face them, we remain children clinging to the illusion of safety. Nietzsche believed that fearlessness was not the absence of terror, but the capacity to love it, to look into the abyss and see not death, but possibility. But before that love can awaken, the self must first collapse. The old identity must die. That's why the unseen consequences of fear are so devastating. They keep humanity suspended between potential and paralysis, a species of sleeping giants, dreaming of freedom while clutching the bars of their golden cages. And yet hidden in this tragedy lies a seed. The very force that enslaves can also liberate. Because fear, when faced directly, reveals its secret nature. It is not an enemy but a doorway. To step through that doorway is to begin the rebellion. The rebellion against everything false, everything safe, everything that has kept your spirit small. And that's where Nietzsche's true secret begins to unfold, not in theory, but in defiance. Because to live without fear, you must first decide that no illusion is worth your soul. Imagine standing in front of a mirror, not the ordinary kind, but one that reflects not your face, but your soul. In it, you see everything you've avoided, the fears you've justified, the dreams you've delayed, the truths you've buried under convenience. You stare long enough, and the image begins to move. The reflection starts asking you the questions. Who are you without your fears? What would you create if you stopped waiting for permission? What part of you have you allowed to die in exchange for comfort? Most people would turn away. But you, if you've come this far, you can feel something rising beneath the terror. A pulse, a hunger, a spark. Nietzsche called that spark the will to power. Not power over others, but power over the self, the capacity to transform fear into strength, pain into meaning, chaos into creation. The rebellion against fear begins here, not in the world outside, but in the furnace of your own consciousness. For centuries, philosophers, prophets, and revolutionaries have tried to change society. Nietzsche aimed at something deeper, to change the human condition itself. He knew that fear could never be defeated externally, because the tyrant is not out there, it's inside. The oppressor lives within your own psychology, disguised as the voice of reason, morality, and self-doubt. To rebel, then, is to declare psychological war on that inner tyrant. The rebellion begins the moment you stop negotiating with fear, when you recognize that the life you've built on its terms, safe, predictable, controlled, is a slow death. When you realize that every great act of creation, from art to love to philosophy, was born not from safety, but from risk. To live without fear, you must be willing to lose. To lose certainty, identity, approval. You must risk becoming a stranger even to yourself. This is why Nietzsche said, you must become who you are. At first, it sounds paradoxical. How can you become what you already are? Because you have spent your life becoming what others expect. The self you call I is often a compromise between your truth and your fear. Rebellion begins when you reverse that order, when truth outweighs fear. But the path is brutal. It demands the death of illusions. Nietzsche called this the path of the overman, the one who transcends humanity's inherited weaknesses. Not a superhuman of muscle and might, but one who stands sovereign in his own being. The overman is not fearless because the world is safe, but because he no longer depends on the world for safety. He is free because he has embraced his fate, what Nietzsche called Amor Fati, the love of one's destiny. To love your fate is to stop resisting life's brutality. It is to say yes to everything. The beauty, the suffering, the loss, the ecstasy, the boredom. It means to accept every event, not as accident or punishment, but as essential part of the great symphony that is shaping you. This is the alchemy of the spirit. Fear transmuted into affirmation. Most people spend their lives resisting what is. They demand that reality conform to their comfort, that pain be avoided, that tragedy be justified. But the fearless one stops asking why me, and begins asking what for. This shift is everything. It transforms victimhood into power, suffering into significance. It reclaims authorship of your existence from fate itself. You begin to see that fear has always been your teacher, pointing to where your freedom lies. Fear is the compass of the soul. It shows you the exact direction of your next evolution. If you fear rejection, your next step is authenticity. If you fear failure, your next step is creation. If you fear judgment, your next step is truth. The rebellion is not loud, it's intimate. It begins in the smallest act of honesty. The moment you tell the truth you've been avoiding. The moment you follow a passion without guarantee. The moment you refuse to live a second longer in imitation. Nietzsche said, "The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe." And it's true, rebellion makes you lonely. When you start living by your own values, the world may label you arrogant, dangerous, lost. But remember, that's what they said about every soul who ever became free. Socrates drank the hemlock for questioning convention. Jesus was crucified for defying dogma. Giordano Bruno was burned for believing in infinite worlds. Nietzsche himself was ridiculed and misunderstood, dying in madness but not before leaving behind a philosophy that set fire to the foundations of fear itself. They were all rebels against illusion, and their rebellion was not destruction, it was creation. To break free, you must dare to become a creator of meaning, because the only true antidote to fear is creation. The act of creation, of writing, painting, building, loving, thinking forces you into direct dialogue with the unknown. It teaches you that the abyss is not your enemy, it's your canvas. When you create, you enter the same dance Nietzsche described in his metaphor of Dionysus, the god of chaos, intoxication, and rebirth. Dionysus is the opposite of Apollo, the god of order and reason. Most people live under Apollo's rule, structured, rational, safe. But life itself is Dionysian, wild, unpredictable, alive. To live without fear is to reconcile these two gods within you. To let reason serve passion, and passion illuminate reason. To let the structure of your mind hold the chaos of your soul without collapsing. That balance is freedom. And yet, Nietzsche warned that freedom is not comfort, it is weight. The heaviest weight. When you accept full responsibility for your life, there is no one left to blame, no one left to save you. That is the moment of ultimate solitude and ultimate empowerment. He called it the eternal recurrence, the idea that you must live as though you would repeat every moment of your life forever. Every choice, every regret, every act. Imagine the gravity of that idea, to live so honestly, so courageously, that you could say yes to your life exactly as it is, without wishing a single moment away. That's what living without fear truly means. Not that life becomes easy, but that you stop running from it. You embrace the storm and find peace within it. The rebellion, then, is not an escape, it's a transformation. It doesn't remove pain, it removes illusion. You stop asking for a lighter burden and start cultivating stronger shoulders. You stop trying to control the world and begin mastering yourself. And in that mastery, fear loses its power. It no longer dictates your choices, it becomes fuel for them. Every time you feel fear and act anyway, the old self weakens and the new self is born. Each act of courage is a small revolution, a declaration that life's uncertainty is not your enemy but your ally. Nietzsche would say that this is the beginning of the dancing spirit, the human being who no longer resists existence but celebrates it. One who has walked through despair and emerged laughing. One who knows that the meaning of life is not found but created. You cannot think your way out of fear. You must live your way through it. To break free is to burn not in destruction, but in purification. The false identities melt away, the illusions dissolve, and what remains is something elemental, untamed, divine, the part of you that has always been free. And when that fire ignites, you no longer ask how to live without fear because fear becomes part of the fire. But the journey doesn't end there. The rebellion is only the awakening. Beyond it lies something deeper, quieter, more profound. The ultimate truth Nietzsche hinted at but few ever understand. The truth that once you have faced everything, even fear itself, there is only one thing left to do, to love it all. Imagine you are standing on the edge of a cliff at dawn. The sky is an ocean of burning gold and ash. The wind howls through the emptiness below, and somewhere in that vast silence, something inside you shifts. You've spent years climbing toward this place, fighting fear, breaking illusions, dismantling every false layer of yourself, and now, There is nothing left between you and existence itself. You take a breath. There is no safety net, no ideology, no God, no meaning handed down to you. Everything that once gave you direction has crumbled. You are utterly alone, and yet, in that aloneness, there is peace. This is where Nietzsche wanted you to arrive. Not in despair, not in triumph, but in radical acceptance of existence as it is raw, merciless, magnificent. The place beyond fear, beyond hope, the place of Amor Fati, the love of fate. The journey began with fear, the fear of uncertainty, rejection, death. But the end of the journey is love, not sentimental love, but cosmic love, a love so vast it embraces tragedy, suffering, and impermanence without flinching. The fearless person does not escape pain. They say yes to it. This is Nietzsche's final secret, that the only true way to live without fear is to fall in love with life in its entirety. When he wrote, "My formula for greatness in a human being is Amor Fati," that one wants nothing to be different, not forward, not backward, not in all eternity. He wasn't proposing passivity. He was describing the ultimate act of strength. To say yes to every joy and every heartbreak, every mistake and every miracle, every betrayal and every revelation, that is the courage that transcends fear, because fear is born from resistance. The mind resists what is painful, uncertain, uncontrollable. It wants to edit life, to control the script. But the moment you stop resisting, when you surrender fully to reality, fear dissolves, because there is nothing left to protect. You realize that even suffering is sacred, because it has shaped your soul into something vast enough to contain it. The final transformation, Nietzsche knew, is not intellectual but existential. You do not think your way to Amor Fati, you become it. It is a state of consciousness in which the boundaries between self and world begin to blur. The same life that once terrified you now breathes through you. The same abyss you feared is now your home. And so, you no longer ask, "Why is this happening to me?" Instead, you whisper, "Let it happen through me." That shift from resistance to surrender, from judgment to affirmation, is what Nietzsche meant when he spoke of the Übermensch, the overman, the one who transcends the human condition of resentment and fear. The overman is not an external conqueror, but an inner realization. The awakening of the divine creative will that accepts reality as an eternal work of art. When you reach that state, life stops being a problem to solve. It becomes a mystery to celebrate. You begin to see beauty not in perfection, but in impermanence, the fleeting, fragile dance of existence. You see that joy and suffering are not opposites, but twins. That meaning is not something found, but continuously created through the act of living. The fearless person is not without wounds. They simply no longer identify with them. Their scars have become their symbols, their proof of having lived fully. You begin to laugh again, not the laughter of amusement, but the laughter of freedom. The kind Nietzsche described when he wrote, "I would believe only in a God who could dance," because when fear dies, what remains is not seriousness, it's play. The spirit becomes light again. Life, once heavy with expectation, becomes a dance of possibility. You no longer carry the world like a burden. You move with it. And in that dance, something miraculous happens. You start to love everything. The mundane and the miraculous, the triumph and the terror, the fleeting and the eternal. You love the people who hurt you, because they shaped you. You love the failures that humbled you, because they freed you. You love the parts of yourself you once denied, because they were never your enemies, only exiled children longing to come home. This love is not weakness. It is the greatest power in existence, because it leaves nothing outside of itself. Fear cannot survive in the presence of total acceptance. To live in this state is to become life itself, fluid, evolving, unstoppable. You no longer cling to identity, to beliefs, to definitions. You live in perpetual becoming. As Nietzsche wrote, "You must have chaos within you to give birth to a dancing star." You are that star now born from chaos, illuminated by your own fire. And yet, this realization is not an end. It's a beginning. The true test of fearlessness is not found in isolation, but in return, in how you move through the world after you've seen through its illusions. You go back to your work, your relationships, your daily life. But something fundamental has changed. You no longer seek validation because you've become the source of your own worth. You no longer chase certainty, because uncertainty itself has become your companion. You no longer fear death because you've already surrendered to life. You act not out of duty, but out of love for the act itself. You create because creation is joy. You speak truth because silence is too small for your soul. You embrace others not to fill your emptiness, but to share your abundance. This is the new morality Nietzsche envisioned, not obedience, but overflowing strength, not goodness born of fear, but compassion born of power. Because when you no longer need protection, you become the protector. When you no longer need validation, you give others the freedom to be real. When you no longer need meaning, you become the meaning itself. That is the paradox of Nietzsche's philosophy. The moment you accept everything, you transcend it. The moment you love your fate, you become its master. You finally understand that fear was never the enemy, it was the invitation. It was life's way of calling you home to yourself. Every trembling moment, every crisis, every loss was pointing you toward this. The realization that you were never separate from life at all. You and existence were always one. And now you see it, the dance, the flow, the great unfolding, every joy and every heartbreak, every rise and every fall, woven together in perfect symmetry. You laugh again, softly this time, because you finally understand what Nietzsche meant by the eternal recurrence. If you were forced to live this life again and again, forever, every pain, every triumph, every quiet moment of beauty, you would say yes. Yes, to it all. That is the ultimate freedom. Not the power to control life, but the power to love it completely. When that love ignites in you, fear disappears not because the world has changed, but because you have. You no longer live in the world, you live as the world. Every breath is acceptance, every heartbeat is affirmation. And so, standing at the edge of the cliff, you don't step back. You don't leap forward either. You simply open your arms to the wind and whisper the only prayer left. Yes. Yes to uncertainty. Yes to pain. Yes to the unknown. Yes to everything that has ever been and ever will be. Because now you understand the truth Nietzsche tried to leave behind, for those brave enough to hear it. That the secret to living without fear is not to conquer life, but to love it. All of it, even the abyss. Especially the abyss. And from that love, a new world begins. A world not ruled by fear, but illuminated by those who have learned to say yes. The eternal yes.